Hey, what's up, Grinders? This is Dan Gaspar, Mr. Tuttle 05. I'm here with John Breslin, Squirrel Patrol. How you doing today, man?
Good. Yeah, it's a good FanDuel Friday.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't announce the show we're doing. This is FanDuel Friday. Every Friday we do this show, or at least some experts do the show. We're kind of switching it out here and there. And we just take a look at Friday's MLB slate. Once basketball and football start back up, I think we'll dive into those as well. But for the long summer here, we're just looking at baseball. Worth noting, we do record the show fairly early in the morning. So lots of things are subject to change. We've been getting a fair amount of scratches randomly lately. So that stuff kind of happens with pitchers. We saw Luis Severino, who was going to be chalk last night, scratched. So that's important to note. So with that in mind, we try to do a little bit more of an overview than focusing on individual plays per se. But we do still talk plays because some of that is important, especially when we're looking at the pitcher side of things. And looking at that today, so I'm in charge of ownership, MLB ownership on FanDuel, thanks to Chris Cimino. He has a nice setup for me to kind of run things. And I did a quick overview this morning. And I typically don't get an uploading time, and it's kind of just the automated projected ownership that's on there for the show every Friday. But I had a little extra time before we snuck on, and I tried to smooth some things out a little bit. So I want you to critique me on the first look of projected ownership, and specifically the one that I'm struggling with, because I will tell you right now, automated projected ownership, lots of different projections around the industry. They want Robbie Ray to be the chalk on FanDuel today. Is that going to happen, or do you see it more like I see it early in the morning here, that Carlos Rodon, even though he's a little bit more expensive, is eventually going to win out here?
Yeah, we've done this show for football, I think, right? Like the ownership report. I actually agree with you. I think it's going to be, and I was just thinking about that because I think I probably noticed the same thing. But I think it's going to be Rodon because he's more expensive, and I think people are going to go to that, especially like kind of a Friday. You might have a little bit more casual players playing for the Friday night than maybe like say a Tuesday short slate or something. And I think people are going to click on that name. I think he's got like the strikeout upside. I think he's most expensive. He's got a pretty good matchup. So I think I don't think people are going to be that price conscious, thinking like, oh, Robbie Ray on a point per dollar basis or whatever. I think it's going to be Rodon. It's going to be higher owned than Ray. But I think it's a good question. And I think the fact that we might have a few pitchers up there with kind of even ownership kind of gives us some guidance on the slate.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think people are less price conscious on FanDuel specifically. You get that one pitcher as opposed to some other sites where you're rostering multiple. And it allows you to kind of game plan a little bit differently. And in general, I think people are just less price conscious. And they also see Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is the team people like to pick on. Oakland, I am very happy for once in what seems like the past month. They don't have an actual decent pitcher that you can roster going against them. Unless unless you're excited to roster Zach Greinke, I shouldn't throw him out of the picture to start. But it feels like for the longest time, basically anybody facing Pittsburgh, anybody facing Oakland just sees extreme ownership just because, hey, those teams are terrible. Okay, so we talked about Rodon, we talked about Ray. Talk to me about the rest that you see here, I guess, higher end, because we do have some higher priced alternatives we can go to as well.
Yeah, actually, I like Scooball, but seeing the start of the rainbow there, right, on Lineup HQ, I think everybody else does too. But I think there's a lot of options tonight. So it really depends the size of your contest and what you think the ownership will be. I think if you're in like a 3 max, then I'm probably going to be a lot more inclined to like get away from Rodon and Ray and go to some of these other guys, figuring that like everyone's got just about an equal shot. Not everyone, right? But like maybe the top 6 or so pitchers might have an equal shot of being the top guy at the end of the night. So if I can get rid of a huge chunk of ownership with Rodon and Ray, then I'm going to be looking at like Scooball. I like John Gray a lot too. I think he's had a thing in his article that there's no reason to drop down that low. But actually, facing Detroit, I think that's a really good matchup, and I think he's going to go much lower owned, being a little bit down in the salary. Even though the price difference isn't that high. Like if you sort the pitchers by salary, he's a little bit lower. So I think people are going to go like gravitate around Rodon and Ray. And I think like John Gray and Tariq Skubal are the guys that I'm most interested in. Maybe even like Frankie Montas, and maybe even some Lucas Giolito.
Yeah, he's the Giolito. I'm glad you mentioned him. He's the one that kind of is the forgotten guy. His strikeout rate hasn't been quite as strong this season. Some speed bumps here and there, but he's the guy that continually stands out to me on some of these slates as the guy that has the upside that just is not going to see the ownership. And I think it's important to know that when we have this projected ownership here, we're looking more large field type stuff. So I believe there's the 444 on FanDuel today. There's some, larger field tournaments that we're looking at when we're talking about this. When we're looking and talking about single entry, you mentioned knocking out the Rodon and Ray ownership. Like those guys could combined see about 50%, I think. So in some of those smaller field stuff. So if you're looking, to get different in smaller field, I think that's completely reasonable. Just knocking Ray and Rodon out of your pool. And then if neither of those guys perform, you're knocking 50% out right away. John Gray, is he the lowest you're going? 8,600?
Probably. Unless something changes, I think it's probably John Gray is going to be probably the lowest I go. Then you got like Mackenzie Gore, who's in Coors. And I don't know that there's anybody where the upside matches like the risk, right? Like there's nobody below that 8,600 mark where the potential upside exceeds the risk. Because I don't see a reason to go there. There's so many good options above that mark.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement. I guess, I jokingly talked about Greinke on top of the show. I might throw him a few extra projected percentage points and projected ownership because once, when you start diving in, the starting pitching position is actually pretty jacked up pricing wise on today's slate. Typically, we do see some guys sneak in more in like the 7Ks and even under that actually have like some upside. But like you mentioned, we don't really see that at all today. Like Devin Smeltzer's looked pretty decent from an ERA perspective, but he doesn't really have strikeout stuff. Looks like he's actually been getting a little bit lucky if you look at some of the batted ball data on him. There's no real way. Sometimes it's fun to build lineups with those lower priced guys and try to flip the build a little bit, but I think I advise against it on this slate personally.
Yeah, I think like that might be a strategy for like a little bit of a smaller slate where you're really like no one's going to be able to get to this combination of high priced hitters unless you use like the overlooked really cheap pitcher on such a big slate. Like when you're looking at 11, 12 games, like there's going to be a bunch of low priced guys that hit home runs. And so it's probably a safer bet to try to find those lower priced guys through stacks that are going to hit a home run or at least, hit a 3-run double or whatever the case may be and go with some of the higher priced pitchers that are more likely to put up a possible winning score.
Yeah. And you mentioned high priced batters that people will try to get to. When you have Aaron Judge priced at 3,600 against Ross Stripling, and he's going to project let's see. I used aggregate projections here. He's projected behind Manny Machado in these aggregate projections. It's the second highest. So Machado is probably about as expensive as you're getting. He is 4,300. Rafael Devers, Jose Ramirez probably won't see a ton of ownership. Jose Ramirez against Clayton Kershaw, Devers against Wainwright. So yeah, about as high as you're getting is Machado at 4,300. And then we're looking after that. It thins out fairly quickly. Talk to me about, again, this is a little bit bigger of a slate. I think we're at 11 games on FanDuel because they do not have the Washington doubleheader in there, which I love. By the way, I'll just say that I love not including doubleheaders, and I love FanDuel's stance on that. I think they had one hiccup earlier this year with it and kind of just threw it away. And honestly, that's not their fault. Doubleheaders are extremely hard to deal with. I see our tech team deal with it all the time.
I was going to say that, yeah, from a content side, like when you're doing like expert rankings and it's like Bryce Harper, what does that mean? Bryce Harper game 1, Bryce Harper game 2? Is Bryce Harper in the game 2 lineup? We don't know yet. We might not know until after the slate starts. Yeah, it's a technical debacle, and I'm glad they just exclude game 2 of doubleheaders, because I don't want to sit around and wait either, right? And sometimes, like, you never know. Like, sometimes you see the little thing that says, okay, this guy's in the lineup, but he's not actually in the lineup because he's in the lineup for game 1, and the indicators get messed up because of the technical issues. Scrap game 2 of doubleheaders. I'm a Nationals fan. They're my team. I'm glad they're not on the slate. I don't want to think about them because it's game 2 of a doubleheader.
It's kind of crazy because the Phillies would be one of the chalkier teams going up against Espino, and pitching in general in that game's not good. But yeah, get rid of doubleheaders. Team FanDuel on that one. But so what I was going to say, though, 11 game slate, typically we don't have to worry too much about one-off ownership. But talk to me a guy like Aaron Judge when we're talking about not necessarily including him in stacks, but how do you handle him with your builds? Do you treat him and you're fine taking on that chalk as a one-off? Just talk to me how you handle him.
Yeah, I'd rather make the decision after I see what they do in the game. But that's the big decision point. I think the Padres ownership and Aaron Judge's ownership is going to be the big decision point.
Yeah,
I think probably the smartest thing to do, and I don't always do this, but I think it's the smartest thing to do, would be to make a decision. Like, I'm going to include, if you're doing 150 lineups, right? I'm going to do some Padres stacks, but I'm not going to have Manny Machado as a one-off, right? Or I'm going to do some Yankee stacks, but I'm not going to have Aaron Judge as a one-off, or do the opposite. Like, say I'm going to pick some guys, from the Padres that I'll have as a one-off, but then I'm not going to do any stacks of that team. I just think, if you're doing both with 150 lineups, like you're going to do a bunch of Padres stacks, and then you're going to end up with like 80% Manny Machado or Aaron, 80% Aaron Judge across your 150 lineup set, and then it's just tough. It's tough to rise to the top then when no matter what the guy does, when they're going to carry such high ownership on this slate. Like, I think the Padres, have the highest implied run total I've seen so far this season, and they're probably going to have the highest ownership this season. I think like Manny Machado is going to be the guy that probably carries the most of that ownership.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's good too when you're talking about how to implement or use the really high-owned guys in stacks too. We just look back to this past week, Atlanta Braves, Ronald Lacunia was massive chalk, and the Braves were massive chalk this whole past week. And Acuna was the guy you needed to leave off of those stacks to actually cash anything. He had not a great series. Was it against Washington? Was it against your team?
Yeah. Basically, everyone's the chalk that they're facing Washington because it's super hot and muggy here right now. They've been playing at home, and all of their good pitchers have been scratched. So,
yeah. So, Acuna was the guy you had to leave off. You had to do some bottom of the order stacks, things like that, to really take down tournaments. And it would not be that surprising if something like that, similar happened, tonight. If Manny Machado was the guy you had to leave off of your San Diego stacks, or Judge was the guy you had to leave out of your New York stacks. Let's go to the stack tool here. This is Derek Hardy's. I have it projected here so we can get a little bit better look at what Cardi's projections, the bat projections, say are some of the top stacks of the slate. So Padres, pretty wide margin. He has Yankees third, Rockies against Mackenzie Gore second. I think that the Rockies side is going to be significantly lower owned. What are your thoughts on the Rockies?
That's always an interesting thing because everybody always wants to play the road team in Colorado, and the Rockies always carry much less ownership. But they're generally not huge underdogs, right? So the Rockies could easily win this game, but they're going to have to carry much less ownership than the Padres. So that's something you think about. And that's something I always think about. Is it's just stack the Rockies instead of the Padres. Generally, their prices will be a little bit higher because I don't think the pricing, even though they might elevate the prices for the road team in Colorado, you're generally getting a discount based off point per dollar discount. But yeah, I like the idea of playing the Rockies probably more than the Padres tonight.
You kind of get it though when you I have the Rockies clicked on here. you kind of get it when you look at their lineup, and it's like, this team is not the most fun team to stack. One of their best hitters, well, two of their best hitters, Charlie Blackmon, Ryan McMahon, will not have the platoon advantage against Mackenzie Gore. I mean, obviously, it doesn't matter a whole lot when you're hoping the game goes to the bullpen early. But you kind of get why they'll be lower owned. It's not as an attractive of a stack, but hey, it's in Coors. Mackenzie Gore struggled his last start, struggled big time with control. So I get it. I get why they're would be projected as one of the higher scoring stacks on the slate. Let's see what else we have here on top. I'll talk to you about this game and then another one real quick. The Red Sox Cardinals game. Cardi's projections has those as two of the top 5 stacks on the slate. We talked about weather here. Let's go to weather. That was one of the games I think that stood out from a weather perspective. Warm with winds out to right at 50 miles per hour was what Roth says here on his weather report. I like the Cardinals side of this stack personally, and I think we'll get fairly low ownership on them, but also just this game in general, I think will go fairly low owned.
Yeah, I think so. I think so much ownership is going to gravitate to the Padres, and I do. I like this stack probably the best, like either the Red Sox or the Cardinals. I think the game's going to go a little bit overlooked more than it should. Like people, I think we're going to set 25% Padres stacks. And it's difficult to fade them because like I faded Philadelphia last night. They had the highest implied run total, which just destroyed Washington. So it's tough to fade like that highest owned team. But last night was a 5 or 6 game slate. I think it was 5 game slate. So there's only 10 teams. This is what an 11 game slate. It's 22 teams. So we got 22 teams that, 21 teams can potentially outscore the Padres. And yeah, the first place I would look is this Boston-St. Louis game in Boston. I mean, this is a big park upgrade for St. Louis as well.
Yeah. Yep. Agree there. Do you have any kind of lower owned secret stacks that you're eyeing up? Again, I think you kind of said it though, like anything outside of San Diego, is essentially going to be fairly low owned, but let's get so outside of San Diego, we talked about New York a tiny bit, St. Louis, Boston. Anybody else? Any other teams you're really looking at?
I think the Dodgers. I've been kind of trying to be a little bit overweight the Dodgers all season, and they really haven't put it together yet. I think Max Muncy will be highly owned. That's a really good price on Muncy, but he's like I hate to use batting average, but I think it's like in the 150s. Because he's low price because he's going 0 for 4 a lot.
Right.
But I like the idea of using a Dodger stack. Maybe one of those teams I'd be looking to use instead of the Padres.
Yeah, I like Dodgers a lot too. And I'm kind of with you on them. I've used them a lot because it feels like they're on the slates recently. It's been like they're the 5th best team, 6th best team to stack, but their offense is so good that when everything clicks, they can do well. Plesac is more of a contact pitcher, a lot of balls in play. Kind of just have to hope it breaks the Dodgers' way. I've mentioned actually on the show before, I like targeting Madison Bumgarner. It has not worked this season. But Minnesota is like the ideal offense to target him with. Really good right-handed power hitters. Byron Buxton's been on a little bit of a tear. Carlos Correa, Gary Sanchez. People do not like to use the catcher position a whole lot on FanDuel. I mean, this is an awesome spot for Gary Sanchez. So Minnesota would be my kind of perhaps a little bit lower owned stack that I like quite a bit. You could go lower the order with them too if you want. Gio Urshela is only 2,300 if he bats. We haven't projected 3rd, but at times he'll sneak down to like the 7th, 6th, 7th, 8th range. So I like Minnesota quite a bit as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we need to talk about. Do you have any other sneaky stacks you want to throw in before we head out?
Yeah, maybe Toronto. I think facing Jordan Montgomery, left-hander. Then they're another team like similar to the Dodgers, where you look at some of these guys and they've got a lot of power up and down the lineup, a lot of good right-handed hitters. So Teoscar Hernandez, Vlad, Springer, like Matt Chapman, Bo Bichette. I mean, any one of these guys can hit the ball out of the park, and so that's. Like you don't always see the winning stack be the team that scores the most runs. It's a lot of home runs. Like that's really like you really want a team not just can score a lot of runs, but can hit for a lot of power. And so Toronto fits that mold, and I think they're going to be much lower owned than some of the other stacks.
Yeah, I agree there. And a really good point about power too, because people just see like, they'll look at implied run totals, be like, well, this team has a really high implied run total, but how are they getting those runs matters a lot. So you're looking for power in those stacks, and that's kind of a hit. I mean, we talked about Colorado a little bit earlier, but that is kind of the hit against them. Is yes, they have an higher implied run total. The game isn't Coors. They don't have a ton of power outside of CJ Cron. Is really good. Really, he's got a ton of power in his bat. But if Gore is just out there walking people like he did his last start, they might score 10 runs. But if they're not getting the home runs, they're just not going to get there. Again, it's a larger slate, so I'm not really interested. Like, I do think this is an interesting point though that I'll bring up, because I see it talked about in our Discord chat every once in a while. I feel like people see a chalky pitcher and they want to stack against them to get quote unquote leverage. Just not playing that pitcher is oftentimes enough, right? Like, do you have a stance on that?
I'll do that more on smaller slates. Like,
right.
All right, like if it's 5
so
teams.
Corbin last night. Let's talk about Corbin last night. Are
Yeah.
you playing Corbin at all? Or are you just not stacking against him?
Right. I'm just not going to stack against him. I mean, if I'm doing 150 lineups and there's only 10 pitchers, I might have like 5% less or Patrick Corbin. Like I might throw in a handful of lineups, and then as soon as the game starts, why would I even do that with 5% of my lineups?
Right.
But yeah, I agree. You don't need to go absolutely crazy. And like on a bigger slate, like 11 games, again, you think about like 22 teams versus 10, like 22 teams. If you're stacking against Rodon, like, yeah, you want to play a bunch of Pirates. I mean, you need them to kind of outscore or outpower the other 21 teams. I mean, that's very unlikely to happen. There's like a middle range. I generally want to target that middle range where, yeah, I'm going to fade Rodon on some teams, and in single entry, I think you can definitely feed him in single entry and try to find one of the other high upside pitchers. And then you don't necessarily need to play the Padres. You can play another team that you think can score a bunch of runs or hit a bunch of home runs, and you're hoping that comes together to at least catch or to be a GPP winning lineup, GPP winning combination.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned on smaller slates too, because I think that's where it really comes into play the most. So like on a slate like tonight, if you're looking for the quote unquote leverage, we're not trying to find these hitters against Carlos Rodon, really, right? This is just not going to happen. But Mike Trout against Robbie Ray, like, there we go. We're talking about a good hitter. We're talking about a hitter with power against a high-owned pitcher. That's what we're looking for. We're not just looking for the low-owned guys just because they're low-owned. We're looking for guys that can actually, do something, be low-owned and do something. So some of these Angels hitters, I know Rendon's been out of the lineup for a while, but he would be another one if you're looking for the real leverage, and Taylor Ward. Like some of these Angels guys I don't mind because Ray has been susceptible. He's allowed some power lately. So, that's where we're looking when we're trying to find, extreme leverage situations. We're not looking to stack against really good pitchers just to stack against them, especially if the offenses are terrible. I think that's all. I think we did a fairly decent rundown here. I'm trying to think if there's anything that we missed. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, it should be a good slate. I do think you should really think about your contest size. So like the rallies, 25,000 or so people. So that's really where you're looking to get really different. You got to be reluctant to do like a Rodon and Ray and combine it with a Padres stack in that kind of large field, just because you're trying to beat out 25,000 other people.
Yeah.
That comes, if you're in a 100-man contest, if you're in the qualifier, like I think the live final qualifier tonight is a 3 max $400, but you only have to beat 100 people. Then you can go a little bit more on the board, right? You don't have to get as crazy as you wouldn't necessarily have to in like that 25,000 person rally.
Yeah, completely agree with that. There is one more thing I want to talk to you about, because you kind of mentioned it. I had forgotten about it. This is my problem. So I'm not nearly as good of a GPP player as you. A lot of the guys who have at RG, I'm not as good at multi-entering. So you kind of briefly went over it. I'll see guys, I'll run my builds, and I'll have a guy coming at 5%. And I'll be like, why do I even have? I'll just cross them out then. Why do I even have them in my pool? Talk to me a little bit about how you treat your player pool. Do you leave those guys in? So let's say I'll go and I'll be like, CJ Cron, I have him at 5% tonight. Is like, talk to me a little bit how you treat the lower end of your player pool. Do you keep it tight? Do you chop some guys off, or just your player pool in general, I guess?
I generally don't like chop anyone off manually. I do try to like boost. I use like my own adjusted projections, and I try to adjust for guys that I think have power. So like maybe like a Nicky Lopez or something, if he's hitting 9th, like somebody that really isn't going to hit a home run. I think like Andrew Velasquez or something on the Angels. Okay, if they're hitting like 9th and they don't have a chance of hitting a home run, they're probably not going to be included in my final player pool just because of the way the projections are shake out. But like sometimes, like think about Joey Gallo. I think this week or last week, I hit 2 home runs out of the 9 spot. Like that's the guy I do want to keep included in my player pool, specifically because if they're hitting 9th, a lot of people are not going to play them. But in that 25,000 lineup field, like being 5% owned on that guy that's only 1% owned, but puts up a big score, that can be a winning lineup, like and a winning strategy.
Yeah, and honestly, Gallo is an excellent sample or example for tonight too, right? Like we have him projected for 3% ownership, batting 9th. Again, we like the Yankees in general, so just do something like a wraparound stack is a way to potentially, get your Yankee stack a little bit different, or even include him in as one-offs because he's going to be low owned. We've seen him; he has the power for those double home run games and really outlier performances. But yeah, I think that's going to do it then for FanDuel Friday show. Again, feel free to reach out to us with any questions you have on the slate or any suggestions for future videos. And that's going to do it. So thanks.